Welcome everybody. We'll be gathering just for 30 seconds or so while people find the links and so forth. So just give us a few seconds here. Good. Okay. Well, look, we're going to get going here. Good afternoon, good morning, potentially good evening, and welcome to our Next in Health LinkedIn Live discussion, where today we're exploring really pertinent topics in healthcare for the sector and also for society. I'm Anthony Bruce, health leader at PwC in the UK, and really delighted to have a fantastic panel with me this afternoon to share their reflections on this critical topic. We're talking about collaboration. We're talking about how through innovation and collaboration we can find solutions to some of the most pressing and important healthcare issues facing society. And one of the big questions we'll look at is to consider where could innovation and collaboration take us, and what's the potential. We hear so much about the potential of healthcare to make an impact on lives and population health and so forth. And we see innovation and collaboration as key levers and enablers around that. As I said, delighted to have an esteemed panel with me today. Malte Gerhold, Director of Innovation and Improvement at the Health Foundation. Dave Tudor, Managing Director of Pharmaceuticals, Health Tech and Quality at the CPI. And Thalita Marinho, a partner in PwC's healthcare practice in the UK, and she leads our consulting practice. Good afternoon to you all.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon. Great to be here.
Afternoon.
Good. Okay. Well, look, let's jump straight in. As I said, I'm delighted to have you here, and we're getting a great response to this Next in Health series that we're running. Perhaps I could come to you, Dave, just really around the topic of collaboration in practice, not necessarily the theory, but the practice of how do we actually move the dial. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre, because I think this is a great example of both innovation and collaboration. And bringing together different parts of the health ecosystem to address particular challenges. But maybe I could come to you to kick us off, Dave, around that.
Yeah, thanks, Ant. And listen, it's great to be involved today. So yeah, the Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre is a unique collaboration between the pharmaceutical industry, academics and government agencies in the UK and Scotland, looking at developing advanced technology and digital solutions to transform how we make drugs today. That's what its mission is. It does that in two different ways. It pulls together specific grand challenges, looking ahead of the industry, and pulls these partnerships together to execute. And at the same time, it has built a centre which allows us to demonstrate the technology and the digital solutions at a GMP level, which means that the industry can easily pick it up and translate it in. We're not in the world of research and development, we're not in the world of commercial supply, but we're in the world of translation of advanced technology and digital solutions into the pharmaceutical industry to transform how we make drugs of the future.
Fantastic. Yeah, very clear and clearly important. And as you say, a very much an applied approach to the topic, not an investment in purely in the research and development side, and a great example of collaboration and bringing partners together. Maybe coming to you, Malte, around the importance. You heard there a great example, as Dave outlined, around the collaboration that exists around MMIC. In the environments that you operate in, how are you seeing organisations, governments, etc., collaborate in practice?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony, and thank you for having me at this session this afternoon. I mean, we know from our research at the Health Foundation over the last decade or so that collaboration is essential for successful innovation and for successful change and transformation, as much as the spread and adoption of new innovations. I think it's important to emphasize that when we talk about collaboration, this is collaboration at lots of different levels, all of which matters. So, for example, you've got the collaboration in terms of the senior leadership agreement and coalition for change, so to speak, where we want to change care. You've got the clinical leadership and collaboration to make sure that new approaches are adopted and agreed with to make happen. And of course, you've got the collaboration between the patients and public and our clinicians and care systems to really make spread happen. And if we look at the current environment, I think this is becoming ever more important. First of all, we're thinking a lot more rightly around population health and population changes, which means that this collaboration now needs to take place across providers, but also across several populations and communities, rather than much more bilateral than maybe in the past. And we also see that with the much greater introduction of new technologies in this question and conversation, the way we collaborate with the suppliers of technology needs to change towards one where we evolve the approaches rather than just buy something off the shelf. And that's something we're now seeing, particularly in the context of more regional working, but it's also something that we're seeing many areas struggling with under the current pressures with workforce and funding and recovery.
Perfect, great. And something that's occurring to me as we're discussing here, and I'm going to come to you in a moment, Thalita, is maybe thinking about what are some of the barriers, actually, because I think we would all violently agree that collaboration is important, but I think maybe a reflection back after I come to you, Thalita, around some of the things that get in the way, whether that's the incentive model, whether that's organizational, constructs, whether it's about knowledge and information flow, is it cultural, etc. It might be interesting to reflect on that. But Thalita, from your perspective, what are some of the opportunities for the public and private sector to come together, e.g. outcome-based pricing, stimulating innovation, etc.? What are some of your reflections there?
Yeah, thank you, and lovely to be here. I think, like you said, we all violently agree in the need, right, to bring private and public sectors together. And I mean, before I go to some practical solutions, I think we just need to also reflect on the situation we find ourselves in the UK, right, where from a healthcare delivery, we're still dealing with some backlogs and waiting lists, and of course, budgetary pressures. But then when you think about the pharma side of things, companies are focusing even more on specialty drugs, personalized medicines, where there's unmet need, but then of course the high costs associated with it. So how can we come together, right? I mean, I think we've seen firsthand how the sector really came together in the extraordinary challenges of COVID-19. I think we need to build on that momentum. A couple of very practical areas to really foster that collaboration. I mean, we can look at increased joint funding efforts. We can look at, collaboration in research initiatives, particularly in that early stage of research and, to bridge the gap to commercialization. We could do, real world evidence jointly to fill the knowledge gaps, accelerate clinical research. And of course, we can look at risk sharing agreements, right? The ones that you mentioned when it comes to reimbursement. And I think building on some innovative partnerships that we've seen already.
Great. Yeah, no, yeah, very good points. And great to have you here, Thalita. Just before I want to move on to a sort of leadership, culture and purpose, we touched on it a little there, but and maybe some of the things that occurred in COVID, but any initial reflections on that point around some of the things that get in the way of that collaboration that we think is critical to sort of the success in this area? Any reflections from any of you on that?
Quite happy to come in, Anthony, on this. I was going to say that, I think probably in a bit later point, but the ability to really invest in the time and skills and expertise that sits in change and transformation and collaboration, not just in the new technology. We sometimes say at the Health Foundation that's so important to invest in the change, not just the technology. And I think that's something that's slightly fallen by the wayside recently, partly due to funding pressures, but also time and workforce pressures. And if we're not willing to really make time and funding available for how people come together and think about change and make it possible, then the best technology, and even buying the best technology, is not going to give us the change that we need.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. It's a great point.
And
Dave, go ahead.
I mean, to build on what Malte's saying, and to me, there has to be a willingness to collaborate, and spending time finding the pre-competitive space to collaborate is really essential. I think the pharmaceutical industry has all been about IP and protectionism of the science and at times the technology. I think where we can find pre-competitive spaces or needs, then that's where we see collaboration. And, the biggest example of that was the COVID pandemic. I'm sure we'll talk about that later on, but there was a need for collaboration. And we saw the whole sector, both private and public, working together to solve a problem. And I think that's where the opportunity is here.
Yeah, agree. And we saw a big shift in that time around the sort of, if we think about leadership, culture, and purpose, and maybe coming to you, Malte, we saw a big cultural shift, not just with the NHS, but as you said, the wider healthcare system with pharmaceutical companies and others leaning in. I don't know, have we slipped back from that position? But maybe, Malte, how do we, A, have we slipped back, and B, how do we build on where we were?
Yeah, so a couple of reflections on this. So, first of all, sometimes people say the COVID pandemic has given us the platform, burning platform is maybe not the best phrase there, but has given us the platform and urgency to really make a difference. And have we lost that again now that we're hopefully a bit more on top of the pandemic? I don't think that's true, and people seem to forget that we still have the same platform of urgency, not from the pandemic, but just from the changes that we see in morbidity and population coming ahead of us. We recently did some projections of the number of people with major illnesses in 2040. And just in England, we will have 1 in 5 people living with a major illness in 2040. That's about 9 million people. And an extra 2 million people between now and then. Over 70 are going to live with a major illness. So if you're looking for that urgency and that sense of we need to change now, then it doesn't get much bigger than this, though it's definitely going to get more difficult, because the best efficiency and productivity initiatives are not going to help us with that change and demand sort of for it. So I think that's the first one, of reminding ourselves that there is that urgency for change, even though it's no longer COVID. I think the second one, the point around collaboration and investing in change was made, but there is a second one, which I think that through COVID, there was a very clear proposition to the public and to patients that things needed to change and why they needed to change. That was understood by everyone, even though not for good reason. And I think sometimes at the moment we slightly miss setting out a clear, positive picture and direction of how we want to see care change. We focus a lot on recovery, which is essential and important, but we're actually not really talking about what we want to see after that. And I think that's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, no, great. That's a great point. That's a great point. I guess, at the MMIC, Dave, you see, a number of different players coming together. What do you see as some of in that culture and leadership space, some of the key opportunities, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is that the solutions that we are creating, it's very obvious to us. In some cases, we can have a dozen or so organisations, small and large, working together to solve problems. No single organisation can solve on their own. And that is very obvious and recognised by all of the collaborators. So working together to solve problems is really important. And, we are trying to promote that there are spaces where, okay, the pandemic was a burning platform, to use the term earlier, but there are other significant societal pressures on this industry. The carbon footprint we have is, I think it's larger than the automotive industry.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous. But why are we not sharing the digital solutions, which are really just pre-competitive opportunities to share? Why can't we all improve in that manner? You look at oligonucleotides as a new drug modality, as an opportunity. That drug modality is really opening up areas of unmet medical need. We're seeing a proliferation of the pipeline growth, but yet we know the chemistry that exists today, there is not enough raw materials in the world for that old synthetic process to operate. Right. So why can't we collaborate to find the new processes to make it happen? So there are clear societal needs, and I think we've got to get that message across and find the sweet spot of collaboration.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and that point about the collaboration across industries, across players in the health system, but also across industries, I think is something that we'll definitely come back to. Moving us on, Thalita, from a strategy perspective, how do you see how organisations should be looking to balance both commercial and purposeful goals?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I honestly believe that it goes back, to the point that Dave was making around collaboration. Back in July 2021, the UK government, of course, published the life sciences vision, right? Where you have this 10-year strategy on how to realize our ambition to become a leading global hub for life sciences, right? And this was all about improving the research infrastructure, supporting the NHS to improve the uptake of innovation, and creating the right business environment for the life sciences to thrive. So I think that pharma specifically needs to be looking to engage this broader life sciences ecosystem. And back to Dave's point again, around that need for, there's such a learning platform across different topics. And only then can we really improve access to care and outcomes for patients, which is really the whole point of this. And I think that there has to be a recognition from the industry perspective that they do have an important role to play in, prevention and early detection of disease, again, potentially risk sharing when it comes to the introduction of innovative drugs, support in healthcare delivery, and importantly, taking into account the social determinants of health, right? And it's only through the collaboration of government and industry and academia and the NHS that we can collectively achieve this vision and I think, deliver on the desired patient outcomes.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, great point. Okay, moving us along, I'd like to hear your views on the sort of skills and capability agenda. We've talked a lot in the past about sort of a UK PLC. How do we build the right STEM skills, or is it softer skills? But I was with some business leaders in Cardiff yesterday for a meeting around this topic, and public and private sector, and there was absolute sort of a single voice around, if we can't, all of this is very interesting, but we're not competitive if we can't get the right people with the right skills coming out of the education system, and also engage people of all ages in productive and good work in this area. So I'd like to drill down onto the skills agenda in that context, if I may. I mean, maybe coming to you, Malte, around the, how do we do that? How do we get the skills that we need to keep pace with this degree of change that you've heard, colleagues talking about on the call today, and how do we collaborate to do that?
Thanks, Anthony. I'll maybe let Dave and Thalita talk about some of the more specific skills in particular industries. I mean, sort of starting with a couple of broader points. We already had the point around wider change expertise and transformation expertise. That's just as important as the technical expertise we may need around particular technologies or new scientific research areas. I think another point there is that increasingly we will see technologies that will not require a skill as if it's a new machine and we just need to tell someone how to use that machine or how to provide that particular drug. Things like generative AI will mean that the ability and skills that we're looking for are much more about how people can actually continuously adapt and develop in their role, because they might be able to build their own apps on top of an electronic patient record or what they're seeing and doing. So I think there's also very, very different skills that we need to start talking about in the same way that people learn using computers rather than sort of specific intervention. That's sort of first point. And I think the second point related to this is that while there's lots of talk around AI and new technologies replacing jobs, actually the evidence shows that in many, many cases, and we've done some research on this, particularly in primary care, lots of aspects of people's roles will be replaced, but no one role will be completely replaced. And as a result, what it looks like to be a GP or a receptionist or a nurse in various settings will significantly change. And I think within that, it's not just about thinking about the skills, it's also to say, what do we want those roles to look like in future? What do we want them to be? And as a result, how do we utilize the technology and build the skills around it? I think at the moment, we often react to the new technology and we don't proactively say, this is the change we want and how can the technology react to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And in relation to AI particularly, we need to create the technology as a force for good here, rather than assume it will just get there on its own, because there's a lot of scaremongering around AI, and probably appropriately so. But actually, we need to actively engage in the debate, I would say, and to shape that technology to be the force for good that we know it can be. Maybe Dave, coming to you from a pharma perspective, you're at the sharp end around the MMIC in terms of actually, getting some of this done. How do you see skills and capabilities, as you look at this, as you look at this sector?
Yeah, and I think two opportunities or two challenges, whatever way you want to look at it. The first is digital is here. If you look at the pharmaceutical industry, the use of predictor models, artificial intelligence, and how you develop a drug and get it to the market. If you look at the expectations then how you manufacture and supply a drug, the world is changing. So the current workforces will have to be upskilled and develop that digital capability. I can see that transformation happening as we speak. So I think that's a big challenge. How do you take that workforce who may be doing a job for 20 plus years, and how do you upgrade into that digital world? The second area is in around the number of new drug modalities. If you look at, RNA, vaccines, therapeutics, intracellular drug delivery systems that are coming through to support that. If you look at oligonucleotides, where cell and gene therapy viral vectors are going, there is much more complexity in the mix of drug types. And I think that's a challenge for organisations, particularly the startups and launch in these new areas. How do they find the skills? And I think, it's very important that academic institutes are reflecting how they build the future skills workforce for that. But also there's going to be a re-education, retraining of existing workforces to be able to deliver some of these new drug modalities. So for me, that's where I see the two opportunities. And companies that can really master that, I think will be very successful.
Yeah, for sure. And Thalita, you're working with clients and UK and inbound organisations taking products to market and overcoming some of those challenges. How do you see collaboration in this context being relevant to that topic?
Yes, so I think, in line with the topics we've discussed earlier today, this is one of those, thorny challenges that no single member of the ecosystem is going to solve on their own, right? We do need, partnership across the ecosystem. So collectively, we can, for example, support postgraduate opportunities and training programs in the areas where there's significant capability shortages. And then I think alluding a little to what Dave just said, innovation in medicines, brings with it, by definition, a need for a range of skills. And R&D is going to naturally gravitate to areas where those skills can be found, but including outside of the UK, right? So this is where we need to, pay attention, because if the sector fails to fill these shortages across the pipeline, you can just see pharma companies moving their R&D elsewhere, where actually they are going to have the skill sets for a specific therapeutic area, just like Dave went through. And we've seen both industry, both pharma and the UK government acknowledge this growing skills gap.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's a deep understanding that a pharma company's success is dependent on its ability to attract, to recruit, to train, and to retain, of course, this very skilled life sciences workforce.
For sure.
Now, there's a lot of initiatives that pharma companies are deploying, right, internally, in terms of looking at corporate culture, upskilling, training new recruits, and current employees. But I think there's so much more that we could do if we collaborated on topics, for example, such as highly skilled apprenticeships. A lot more that we can go after together. For
sure. Great point. And I was with the CEO of a large pharma company, and they were describing their efforts as a human endeavor. And I think we heard that from you and the panel earlier. I'm going to move us on. We've got about 6 minutes to go. Some of the big challenges that we're seeing. So clearly a challenging time, but a time of great opportunity, particularly for the public health sector. A demand on service. We have an aging population and challenges around productivity and staffing levels and tremendous pressure on employee well-being. Malte, when we think of innovation, we probably think big picture and those sort of classic, big, exciting developments. But with many of the challenges we're currently facing, do we also need to think more practically and collaboration on the ground, that day-to-day change? At a sort of community and place level. I welcome your thoughts. Welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Anthony. It's not so much that we get distracted by the new shiny things, isn't it? It's often that they can address a very, very specific aspect, like new drugs around a rare disease or otherwise. And actually, a lot of the improvements that we can now see in the health and care system will likely to be in processes and some of the back office processes and some of the administration, built on better data, better triaging, reducing the time that clinicians and care staff have to spend on admin, and also a lot of the technology that currently is making the biggest difference. If you think about remote monitoring or virtual ward, with all respect to many of the companies involved in this, the technology is not rocket science. What is rocket science is how the technology is changing the way that we're looking after people in their own homes, how we're bringing clinicians together in different teams. And I think we will see the biggest difference over the next 5 years or so in how care is being delivered, not in brand new technology, but in how existing technology is being applied.
Right. That's a great point. I'm going to move us along, and I think you talked there about how health systems and providers engage with patients. Maybe Thalita, just in terms of patient outcomes, we can't lose a focus clearly where we're talking about collaboration or skills on how does this show up and remain focused on the needs and outcomes for the patient. Maybe coming to you, Thalita, how do we cut through the science and technology and the strategy to ensure that we're absolutely laser focused on those outcomes?
Yeah, and getting back to basics, right? To the whole point of the industry. Yeah. Listen, I think it's relentless focus on the unmet needs, right? Be it around R&D for therapeutic areas where perhaps we don't have effective treatments in place, or around prevention and early diagnosis of disease, but also around the broader uptake of medicines where the treatments do already exist. But in particular, I think when we talk about outcomes, we need to get a better understanding, and I've mentioned this a couple of times already in the call, but a better understanding of the social determinants, right? Mm-hmm. And so things such as education, employment, social inclusion, and access to affordable healthcare services. Ultimately, we need to better address the health equity and putting more control in the patient's hands and really enabling them to access the right treatment at the right time.
Perfect. I'm going to draw this to a close and just panel ask, and maybe come to you, Malte and Dave first, with some final reflections. We're clearly we saw fantastic momentum through COVID and some really great examples on the call today of innovation and collaboration and how that's coming together in ways that you've outlined. I mean, a really rich discussion, and particularly the point around a human endeavor. And we've got the tech, but if we can't get people to engage in the tech, you don't get the patient outcomes that Thalita was referring to. And I think that's a really critical point to take away from today. I guess just maybe sort of 30 seconds each in terms of reflections on where you think we're heading through this innovation and collaboration, and where you think it can take us looking forward, the sort of 5 to 10 year timeline. What reasons to be cheerful or maybe depressed you have? So get out your crystal balls. And Malte, maybe I could come to you first.
So reason to be cheerful, I think, is that we can imagine a genuinely different and better way of how care is being provided, and the experience that people will have in care, and how staff feel and are able to provide care. I think we just need to invest a lot more in setting out what we want that future to look like, then collaborate with the tech industry and pharma industry to help us achieve that, and really invest in the change and the collaboration to make it possible.
Excellent. Thank you. Dave?
Yeah, so very briefly, I think two things will be different in the future. I think the speed to market will change. I think digital will change the pace of development and the pace of how we do clinical studies. So I think we will get to market quicker in that 10-year period. And I think the second thing I would say is that there'll be many more different types of medicines. I think the new modalities will continue. There'll be new science comes out, and there'll be better and new medicines for unmet patients.
Perfect. Thalita?
Final seconds. I think there's reason to be hopeful because we've seen it during COVID, right? We saw collaboration leap forward, ways of working, digital transformation. If we've done it then, and we still have burning platforms, we can do it again.
Perfect. Okay, look, we're up to time. Thank you for joining the discussion today. We really hope you enjoyed it. Please give us feedback on topics that you would like to hear. Our next one of these is in November, and we've got a great lineup for you. So please keep an eye on LinkedIn and your emails and your contacts for that. Many thanks to Malte, to Dave, and to Thalita for joining the panel today and for sharing your perspectives. Have a great day, everybody, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.